Today we're going to have a look at how we can make your taverns more memorable. Welcome to the Tavern Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether I'm just a roadside stop or your regular dive bar, I'm here to help you with everything. Hey you, yes, you! As you know, every tavern needs reliable patrons, frequent clients who return time after time. If you want to find your way to this here Tavern Dungeon again, I suggest you subscribe, click the bell, maybe leave a comment, do something to keep in touch with me, myself and I. Sam, did you forget to record again and got disposition to your kitchen? Actually, no, the first two times, yes, but remember the second time I did the kitchen dungeon, I talked about creating a chef, which seemed logical to me because I was in my kitchen. Today I wanted to talk about taverns, and that meant drinks, and that meant to me it would be logical to be in my kitchen near my drinks and do the tavern dungeon instead of the attic dungeon. My mind doesn't always make sense to other people, but I feel comfortable doing this, so here I am, all dressed up in my fanciest medieval shirt, talking about medieval inns for your pleasure. So, why taverns? Taverns are a location that players will always interact in. It is very rare for players to end up in a town and not visit the tavern. Not because they're all degenerate drunks, no, taverns are where they stay. It's a part of the town that they will interact with because it means lodgings, food and drink. And you can pass over these taverns, quickly go like, okay, you find a tavern, you sleep, off you go. Or these can be a wonderful bit of framework for nice role-playing moments. Maybe there's a tavern in your campaign that will serve kind of a central point where the players will come back and talk about quests, get contacted by other people who need their help. Or maybe you just want a few memorable taverns spread throughout the land to reflect certain regions and certain towns that they're visiting. That is all fine and dandy. I'm going to say something first, obviously. I've talked about this before, but what I usually don't do is build taverns specifically for a town. I build taverns and shops and what have you. I have like a list, and when my players arrive somewhere and they want to visit said building, I will pick one from the list that fits the atmosphere best. Obviously, my list of taverns is longer than my list of shops because, as I said, they always visit the tavern. Now, making your tavern memorable is relatively easy if you pay attention to three simple things. And that is going to be the atmosphere of your bar, the innkeep and potential other stuff, and obviously a good name that sticks in the head like nothing else. We'll start with the atmosphere. When your players walk into a tavern, you will always narrate what the tavern looks like. And all of them are made of wood and have a nice cozy hearth fire, sure. But what vibe does it give everybody? Does it look like this lively village inn where everybody comes after work to have a nice drink? Or does it look like a degenerate gamblers den where people come to waste away their days? Is there an air of happiness, an air of depression, maybe an air of mystery? Maybe there's some scientific tavern where things explode in the kitchen, but your food tastes really great. You know, even with a small introduction to a tavern, you can already quite set the atmosphere. And it doesn't always have to be a small village inn where people come for a drink after work. So it doesn't always have to be made out of wood. It can also look very special in relation to the location where it is at. A while ago I ran a story where my players had to go to a dwarven city, a large dwarven city, fortress, kingdom on its own, you know, those typical Moria-sized dwarven smallish dwellings. And in the district where they arrived, which is where a lot of strangers basically enter the first time, there's obviously a dwarven tavern, but there was also a tavern being run by an elf, which immediately contrasted with the entire city, which was 100% dwarvish. Well, there was the 0.001% elvish, because there was this nice little tavern that just radiated peace and quiet and relaxation, where the dwarven taverns were a bit more rowdy, perhaps. And that was very clear the moment they stepped in. Instead of the usual, like, solid stonework you'd find in a dwarven tavern, there was a lot of wood being used, and the wood had been crafted and engraved and what have you. So with just a small description like that, they immediately knew, this is a special inn. This is weird. And it gave them the opportunity to interact a lot, because there was a dwarf in the party and he was a woodcrafter, so he was really curious about the wood. He talked with the elf, he made a few bluffs that went horribly wrong, but they had something to talk about, and it created a nice role-playing atmosphere. And that is what taverns, one of the many functions of taverns is in games, is to create role-playing opportunities. So it helps to reach out to your players and hand them something that is not just whatever is going on at the party at that moment, but also some interaction with the environment. And a good tavern certainly does that. So atmosphere, is it happy? Is it a depressing tavern? Is it does it radiate like upper classness in larger cities? It's quite possible that your players walk into a tavern that is actually meant for the richer people in town. Then you will describe the furniture as being fancier. The menu looks a bit more expensive, and the patrons look a lot better dressed. Whereas if you're at the most depressing dive bar in town, the furniture will be worn down. There might be a few nails sticking out of the bar if you aren't careful, and even the best ale is still quite shoddy. Simple descriptions set the atmosphere and transport your players to an entirely different place, even within the same city. Your second component is obviously going to be your innkeep. You can have 20 bars being run by elves, dwarves, humans without a face and a story, but give your innkeep like a characteristic, a disposition, if you will. Again, cheerful, depressed, greedy, eager to please, stuff like that. Maybe give them a quirk, and if you want to go really far, a reason why they're running the bar. But if you give them a disposition and a quirk, that already does a lot. I ran a Day of Dungeons. I ran a live play. It wasn't an inn, but you'll get the idea. I ran a live play where they ended up in the kitchen of a cult den, and they interacted with the head chef. The head chef did not exist before the game started, so I quickly gave him I created this orc in my head. His disposition was, well, orcish, so a bit grumpy, but clever in the kitchen. And his quirk, very visual, was a large cleaver for a hand, because he was chopping up vegetables and meat and what have you. This immediately, in like 10 seconds, gave the character an idea of what type of person they were interacting with. An easy classic example is like the homely halfling, that eager to please halfling who really wants everybody to feel at home in their tavern. The greedy dwarf, they're the classics, they're the stereotypes, but they work as innkeepers most assuredly. But just give them something to stand out, something that sets them apart from other random NPCs that they meet, something that will make them a bit more memorable. It can be the way they walk, it can be the way they talk. I had an innkeeper who was blind a few sessions ago, who knew his inn by heart because he had arranged the table, so he just perfectly knew how to move inside of the inn, but he still was a blind innkeeper, which makes him a bit more memorable than when he had been not blind. Make them memorable. Your innkeep represents the atmosphere of your inn, so they should probably match, even though you can make them clash, go wild. And they are the mouthpiece of the tavern, and quite possibly of the patrons as well. So they kind of have to tie it all together. And then obviously the third part, a good name, or even a bad name, can trigger your players. There's enough, I don't know, the Portsmouth Inn, the Tavern and Wheel, the Wagon House, like generic inn names, you can find them by the dozens. But you can play with names and give them something intriguing. I'm going to give the example of The Last Living Rose in just a moment, which is an inn that I crafted for a Firefly RPG game, so space cowboys, but it worked just. I reused the inn in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to use The Last Living Rose to explain how I tie atmosphere, innkeep, and name together. But already, if you hear The Last Living Rose, it has more of a ring to it than just, I don't know, the Pig's Head Inn, which is fine if you just need a inn to pass through. The Pig's Head Inn will be fine. Little Goblin's Kitchen, what have you, even though Little Goblin's Kitchen already implies there's a goblin in the kitchen, which could be fun. But your basic names are fun, but the Last Living Rose, people might get curious. The most fun I had with a name was in a campaign that I ran during COVID. It was an absolute trash piece of bar called The Salty. And the thing is, they couldn't read the second word. The sign outside was so trashy and so worn out and decayed that the second word was illegible. And my players made all kind of assumptions, one even raunchier than the other, about what the second part could be, like salty, whatever. But in my head, it was just like a fish or whatever, the salty cod or the salty mussel. Though in Dutch, even with mussel, they can do some raunchy stuff if they want to. But you know, it didn't have something, and the name kept them going because they would always return to the same city, and there were like 5 other inns they could pick, but they would always go back to the salty whatever and try to guess what the name was for. And even that on their own already made the place memorable. It was an absolute trash piece of a dive bar. There was no class to be had. The food was awful, but the innkeep was a sour dispositioned human, but the name kept him coming back. Even something stupid like a name. Now, a decent demonstration of atmosphere, innkeep and name together. So an inn I designed is called The Last Living Rose, and I love using The Last Living Rose. The name is based on the song with the same title, obviously. As you know, I love using music or references too. The Last Living Rose, when you come in, you see that the furniture, that the inn once used to be great. Like the furniture is decent quality, but it's all worn out. It's completely worn out, but still functional. So the atmosphere used to be great, now a bit depressing, to be honest. The patrons were like 4 old guys playing cards, talking about the good old times. There was a woman who had like a crippled leg in another corner. Not a lot of cheery people coming here, even though the inn looks quite good, except for the worn out part. There's not a lot of cheery people here, so the atmosphere was quite gloomish. Because it was a Firefly RPG, I could easily use more modern music as well, so I wasn't stuck to traditional fantasy reels or whatever. And I started playing Hurt by Johnny Cash when they entered, which immediately reinforced the slightly depressed atmosphere. Then again, don't be afraid to use Hurt in or other more modern but acoustic-like songs in your taverns to dress them up a bit. Music can do so much. It is the hidden fourth feature of every tavern is good music. But the players knew they were not in for a cheery time. The Last Living Rose on the bar had a literal rose under like a glass, I forgot the name, like a glass bell, a bit Beauty and the Beast like, if you would. And the innkeep, they figured out because they interacted. They were intrigued by the rose, the name. They started talking to the innkeep, and her name was Rose was her last name. I forgot her first name. Let's say it's Amelia Rose, and she was the last descendant of a rich merchant family that got down on their luck because father or grandfather made horrible decisions, and from great merchants they went to respectable innkeeps, and now like the innkeep is starting to wear out. It used to be called differently, but Amelia Rose is the last descendant of the Rose family, and she's incapable of conceiving children, so she is and will forever be the last living Rose. There you are. That's me tying together a name with a location, an atmosphere, and an innkeep. And the quirk kind of was, for Amelia, she was super friendly, albeit a bit gloomy all the time. But if you touched the rose or you were going to hurt it, she would be super angry at you and became overprotective of the rose. It clearly meant a lot to her, this enchanted rose, which was one of the few family heirlooms from better times that she had left. she had grown up in wealth, she had lived through the decay, and she was way past her 50s when we were talking about the last living rose, which she took over, let's say mid 30s, when her father died, and then she changed the name. And see, there's like an entire story behind that, but it rests on three very simple pillars: atmosphere, name, innkeep. Everything else can be made up on the spot. Patrons, what they need to do there, the lodgings, even stuff like that will roll out of your fingertips and your tip of your tongue when you have those three pillars set up. And that is, my dear people, how you create nice, rememberable, nice taverns that will be remembered by your players, that will be interacted with by your players, and that might serve once again as a fixed point for questing, or just a place they travel to, but you want to make it more memorable because it's in a special place or stuff like that. You know, three easy pillars that your entire tavern economy can rest on. And that's actually all I wanted to talk about today. Something quite simple, but since taverns pop up so often in the game, I wanted to hand out these very simple tips to all of you dungeon masters and aspiring dungeon masters to just help you out. There's that. I think I'll have myself a drink, and if all goes well, in 2 weeks I'll see you again in the attic dungeon.